up, everyone? This is Fromal and Dan Favale here with the Full Court Press. Today we're joined by Phil Montanez. He's one of Dan's friends. He's a Knicks super fan. So, of course, we're going to be talking about those New York Knicks. They've gotten off to a 1-3 start. Nothing is going right. No one can put the ball in the basket. And now Tyson Chandler is out maybe for 4 to 6 weeks. So, Phil, how do you see them accounting for this loss?
Well, I think to start off, Bargnani has to be the first short-term answer. And then second short-term answer is going to be cutting Chris Smith and signing another backup center, because Bargnani, as tall as he is for a 7-footer, can't really do it. Hasn't proven to do anything on the defensive end. So we're definitely going to need him to step up and to get some sort of insurance. So I was never a big fan of Chris Smith staying on the roster.
Do you think, Phil, that they, instead of cutting Chris Smith, that they would cut Tor Murray because of the whole nepotism thing that's clearly going on with the Smith family and the Knicks organization? Do you honestly see them cutting Chris Smith? Because I don't.
Well, I think a rational organization would do that, but as much as I love the Knicks, they're not rational.
Yeah, we are talking about the Knicks here.
Yeah.
And how scary is it that you're already saying 4 games in that we're going to have to rely on Bargnani at center?
Is it weird that I love it?
Has the panic button been pushed?
Is it weird that I like it? Is that wrong?
I think so.
I don't think anything's wrong with that. I think people are wrong for pushing the panic button 4 games into a season. I mean, it's just way too premature to make things. It's like saying Paul George is going to be MVP already. So,
what I'm really excited about, because Bargnani is supposedly going to start at center, is this is at least going to force Woodson to ditch the traditional lineups. I'm not saying Bargnani's going to play well at center, because on most nights he probably won't. He's a defensive nightmare. He doesn't rebound. But I really don't understand Mike Woodson's infatuation with the lineups that don't work for the Knicks. I was looking before, and Chandler, Bargnani, and Melo, their starting front court, when they were together on the floor, was being outscored by 30 points per 100 possessions. And last season, his little experiment in the semifinals, could have cost him the series against the Pacers. So this is probably the kick in the ass that Mike Woodson needs, is what I'm hoping for anyway.
See, what I'm curious to see is if he goes back on what they decided before the season to alternate Amari Stoudemire and Kenyon Martin, because they're not supposed to play back-to-back games. Is that going to change now? I mean, they're so thin that they need every able body out there. And I guess we can't really call Stoudemire an able body at this point. It's kind of like an able crippled body. But
is the word able even allowed to be in there? I think crippled is fine.
I see them being more cautious with Stoudemire and less cautious with Martin. I could see Woodson playing Martin way more than Stoudemire, but they're going to have to take the training wheels off of Stoudemire eventually. And as much as I want to keep him healthy for the playoffs, the need is now, and he's not going to matter if we can't get into the playoffs like some people are saying.
Well,
we're not going to.
Here's my whole thing with that, too, is obviously Stoudemire has to be on a minutes cap, but you're not creating any continuity within the rotation by playing some guy every third night for 10 or 15 minutes. And if you just run him ragged into the ground where he gets injured and has to sit out the rest of the year, you know what? At least, A, he was in there as much as he could and some continuity was created, and B, then there's going to be even more continuity once he's down because he's not coming back in the lineup. It's not ideal, but I don't understand the whole let's play these guys every third night.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sort of iffy too, because now it feels like we're really relying on J.R. Smith coming back, and as much as I also really enjoy watching J.R. play, I mean, we saw in the playoffs last year, after he knocked out, Jason Terry, whoever it was, he just wasn't the same player, and that we just can't afford to have those inconsistencies again.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well. Back to the panic button. Isn't it kind of terrifying that the panic button isn't being pushed because J.R. Smith is going to return soon? He's the guy keeping fans sane and maintaining hope for the organization. J.R. Smith, the same guy that is just as good at shooting teams out of games as he is in it.
I don't think that that's what's stopping. At least it shouldn't be. I agree that you're right. That shouldn't be what's stopping people, especially because he hasn't played pretty much at all because he had a knee injury before the suspension. But he was their second leading scorer. He's familiar with playing alongside Carmelo Anthony. Their play styles have worked together in the past. And he's what I would consider a great regular season guy because he's always going to be a wild card in terms of efficiency, but you know he's going to get you 15 to 20 points every night. If he has to take 25 shots to do it, yeah, that's unfortunate, but you can count on those points where, some nights Bargnani looks like he could go off for 15 or 20, and other nights he scores 5. So I think they need him. They definitely need him. I hope he's not what's stopping fans from hitting the panic button, because him coming back isn't going to change almost anything about the situation they're in right now. He can't play center, although he might wind up playing center the way it's looking right now. But he was their second leading scorer, so I could see people looking forward to him to come back.
I mean, I completely agree with everything you just said, and I don't want to discount what Smith did last year because he was phenomenal. I mean, he was a consistent presence that they needed, and Woodson was such a great influence on him. He was rebounding hard. He was playing defense hard. I'm not really concerned about him. I just think it's kind of funny that that's his new role with this team. And speaking of shooting guards, a couple of friends of mine were actually bouncing ideas off me today about how James Dolan might trade Iman Shumpert. I know he's thought of very highly by all of you Knicks fans. I know that he's got a great deal of potential, but Dolan's never been attached to him. So, Phil, could you see him being moved for anyone? I mean, maybe a panic move for a center?
With Dolan, yeah, I could see it. Do I think it's the right move? No. From articles I read online, Dolan is really trying to start to grow younger talent on the team, which I think is definitely needed. And
can you link me to these articles, please? I haven't read that fucking thing anywhere.
Yeah, I'll make sure to tweet it at you next time. But yeah, so he's saying that, and I think Shumpert is someone who we should build around. I think his shot needs work, but from a defensive tenacity standpoint, I'm a big fan of getting up in people's faces and deep pressure defense, and I think that's really great to have. His shot has been improving. I mean, consistency-wise, it's not there. There'll be a night where he'll be on fire and do 20, and then there's the next night he'll have 5. So I think he needs to be more consistent, but I don't think the Knicks should trade Iman Shumpert. I think that'd be a really big mistake.
The thing about trading him is I think Iman Shumpert's probably underrated in most NBA circles, and I'm sure a lot of it's contributed to the fact that I was talking to Adam about this the other day. Iman Shumpert is drawing comparisons to all these guys he doesn't belong to be in the same company with. But he's still on his rookie contract, so you can't flip him for anybody of real value. And if you do, you have to use him as a piece and a larger contract to get someone substantial. So anyone that's worth trading on the Knicks in conjunction with Iman Shumpert, I don't want to see both of them go unless something crazy is going to happen where he'll get rid of Amari Stoudemire's contract for us, which isn't going to happen. I never saw the value of trading rookies still on their rookie deals because you're never going to get adequate value in return.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And it's like just working with the trade machine. It's impossible to construct anything for like Omer Ashik or even DeAndre Jordan without including Amari Stoudemire and making it into like a blockbuster deal that no team is going to do this early in the season.
Dude, do you guys see? I was reading another article online today about our favorite Knicks hater Barkley. Saying that the Knicks have to be a run-and-gun style team now, at least until Chandler returns. Do you guys feel that they have to resort to that style?
I don't think they can, because they're not built to run. If anything, Chandler was one of the few players on this team that can run. I think they need to resort back to last season where they were jacking up threes every 5 seconds. They have most of the floor spacers still there. I know Steve Novak and Jason Kidd's absence really hurt us. But like I said, this all comes back to Melo being at the 4 where he dominated and us spreading defenses wafer thin. And I just used us to describe a team because I'm one of those guys apparently. But I think that's the style of play that they've always needed to play with Chandler or not, because he's not a factor on offense outside of the pick and roll.
The only development I want to see is them just throwing traditional lineups out the window and playing extreme small ball. Go with Bargnani at the 5. Hell, Let Meta World Peace guard centers if that needs to happen.
Yeah, fuck it, right?
As many shooters on the court as you can.
But it just seems like the shots aren't falling. At least not. I mean, again, it's only 4 games to the season, but it just doesn't seem like the threes are falling like they were last year. Tim Hardaway Jr., as much as I really like him, he's got a trigger finger and he's ready to shoot at any time, anywhere in the court. And I just, we need him to be more consistent, and maybe JR will bring that 3-point consistency back, but. The 3-point shooting is concerning.
You see, the 3-point shooting with me, I think, is concerning because I feel like they haven't run the right lineups for it. like Amon Shumpert and Metta World Peace aren't great shooters, so when you're running small, or when the only time you're running small is with both of them on the floor together, they're not the best shooters. So you want to get that lineup like Adam's talking about. Like you get Bargnani into the 5, you get Melo at the 4, and you run that hybrid guard lineup with Prigioni and Felton, and then put Shumpert at small forward. And 4 of those guys, for their careers, are super consistent shooters from beyond the arc. And maybe Bargnani not so much anymore, but you got to get those shooters together. That's only part of it is playing small ball. You got to play those small ball lineups with the good shooters together. So that's the adjustment I want to see them make in the next few weeks.
Would either of you like to see Carmelo Anthony running things out of the post? Like, not just scoring out of the post, but really trying to actively facilitate. He's been a much more active passer this year, even though his teammates' shots aren't really falling when he gets them the ball. Like, he's making a concerted effort to be more unselfish and to involve everyone. I'd kind of like to see what he can do off the blocks because he's been so dominant there as a scorer throughout his career.
He's going to have to do that because who do they have that can score in the post right now? I mean, they didn't have anyone beforehand, but now let's look at it this way. Chandler's gone. Who do we have that's even going to take up space in the post? Nobody. So I think he's going to have to work off the block, and you're right, he's been a much more active passer, and once his teammates' shots start falling, maybe those passes will look nicer because everyone gets on him because he doesn't pass enough, and then when he does pass, when his teammates are missing, he's passing too much, but he's shooting too much. It's a double-edged sword with him sometimes, and I know he does a lot of things wrong. He's far from the perfect superstar, but he catches a lot of shit that he doesn't deserve, and maybe working...
Is he the new LeBron? You know, a couple of years back, no matter what he did, that play where he passed it to Udonis Haslem at the end of a game for that game-winning attempt, and Haslem missed it, he was just crucified for giving up the ball even though it was the right decision. But of course, if he'd gone and taken that shot, he would have been criticized as well.
I think nothing is going to stop the criticism of Carmelo until he wins a championship. And I think that before Chandler went down, I think this was going to be an evolution year for him because, like you said, he had been passing more. He'd been much more willing to get his teammates involved. And now that I think that Chandler's out, you know, I'm afraid he may revert back to playing Superman ball and trying to do everything himself. But I think he needs to continue. I think he will need to be more aggressive, but I think he's going to have to continue, you know, to try to get others involved as well.
That's actually a really good point because Melo is he always was, but now you can make the case since Chandler was an all-star last year and he went down. He's the only star on that team, and he really shouldn't look at it as I have to do it all on my own because Chandler doesn't do things on offense to begin with. I mean, we saw him take some jumpers this year that went down, but largely he's inactive on that end of the floor. So I hope he doesn't, and that's a big concern with me, is that the Knicks rely on Carmelo too heavily already. If Carmelo places another burden on top of that, a burden of his own, what's going to happen? It's been ridiculous towards the end of games. They just try and milk him, and you can't do that. Defenses know what's coming. So he really needs to have the freedom to be able to pass and not worry about, not just the criticism, but not worry about his teammates missing shots like they've been doing.
And I think there's someone, you know, we haven't mentioned who I think is going to be really important. That's Raymond Felton. As inconsistent as he is, you know, when he wants to drive to the hoop, he has surprisingly good speed, I feel like. And he doesn't exploit that enough. And I think he needs to drive into the lane more so he could kick it out. And in the fourth quarter in tight games, instead of giving it to Carmelo all the time, he needs to drive and kick it to other players, and maybe those threes will stop falling. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I really like that point a lot because if you're not going to have those post presences that can score off the blocks, then you've got to find a way to get buckets at the rim somehow. And there aren't that many players who are able to penetrate on that team like Felton can. I don't know that I really trust Shumpert with the ball in his hands if he's driving through traffic, and Felton has kind of earned that trust. I know Dan threw up a little bit earlier when you mentioned Felton, but he does have some talent. He's
got a great motor, and I love him for it, but he is so out of control sometimes, but more than that, he is such a bad defender. It irks me how bad he is. He just bounces off of screens, and that last play, like when Derrick Rose hit the game winner, and Derrick Rose kind of just got right by him, and Chandler had to come help out, which he would have done anyway, but I just don't like the idea of seeing him on the floor late in games. Against the Bobcats, he was either passing to Melo, like Phil said, or chucking up mid-range twos. And I don't want to see that. If he wants to get to the rim, you know what, that's fine. but he needs to get to the rim, and that needs to be his job now more than ever, like you guys have already said, because there's going to be no one down there most of the time. Melo's not going to spend the entire time on the block. He can't work off the block all 48 minutes of the game like Woodson will probably be playing him now. So he's super important, but I don't trust him in the slightest.
And maybe we got to take more. Maybe the Knicks have to take more free throws. Also, Barnes is a good free throw shooter. Melo is a good free throw shooter. Even though Melo doesn't get some calls, doesn't get those superstar calls sometimes. But if Barnes is going to be center, he maybe he needs to do something around the block. Try to get hacked or something to get to the line. But yeah, just a thought.
Who do you see on that team that can be the guy who's going to get to the line? Because Melo's never going to get calls because of the way he plays, and it kind of aggravates me. It used to aggravate me in Denver. You would see that headband on his head flying all around the place because he's getting hit in the head and he's not getting calls. So who do you think on that team? It's not going to be Melo. He'll get to the line maybe more than average people would, but who on this team is going to get to the line consistently for the Knicks? I think it has to be JR, like it was the second half of last year, but I don't know.
I think he's the leading option, but you could make a case for Shumpert as well, and I think there's even more pressure on him to break out as a consistent offensive option and defensive player now that Chandler's out. They need him more than ever before.
Do you think he will, guys? That's a question to the podcast at large. Do you think Shumpert is capable of taking that next step now? Because what's kind of killed him is everything has been forced. I know he's had the injury, but when he's come back, it's always been like, we need this out of you. He hasn't had that chance to naturally develop. And now that Chandler goes down, this could have been the year where, not where there was no pressure, but this could have been the year where he could have taken the leap because he was supposed to take the leap. But now you're going to put more responsibility on him. Is he ready?
He acts like he's ready, and I certainly hope so, but only time's going to tell on that. Like you said, I agree with you that he's been put in situations where he always had to do something, and he's going to have to do this now, and he's going to have to step up to the plate, If he wants to be that superstar that he thinks he is and could be, this is the time where superstars shine, when someone comes knocking. So
that's the thing, is I wonder how highly the Knicks actually view him outside of Carmelo Anthony. I know we've talked about how much Dolan doesn't like him and all that jazz, but Mike Woodson doesn't even seem to like this kid. He doesn't have him on the floor in critical stretches of the games, and he just doesn't seem to trust him as that number two guy. He's talking about starting J.R. Smith still, which is a mistake after J.R. Smith just won Sixth Man of the Year. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't fuck with it. I don't understand why he would start J.R. Smith. I don't understand why they don't give Shumpert adequate opportunity, and now they kind of have to. I don't know if he will, but they don't have other young guys on the roster that are two-way players. There is almost no two-way players on this team, and Shumpert's one of the few, so they need to give him more minutes, especially now that they need defense. It's going to have to start from the perimeter because there's no one to protect the paint inside. So the Knicks have to learn to rely on this kid more to see what he is made of. I don't think they've done that just yet.
We're going to find out the answer on, I guess, against the Spurs on how Mike Woodson really feels. Like you said, if he plays JR, then we know. But he has to give him time. He was calling Shumpert Rook still in Shumpert's second year. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting. I think the next 5 to 10 games will be really telling for the Knicks as to where we're going to be. I know some people are talking about them not making the playoffs. I think that's ridiculous. Give me a break. There's not 4 other teams in the East that are going to knock the Knicks out even without Chandler. So
let me ask each of you a question then. Or it's a twofold question. How do you see the Knicks playing in Chandler's absence? Below 500, above 500, at 500? And ultimately, where do you think they wind up in the Eastern Conference playoff picture?
I think they're gonna be right around 500. I don't know that I'm confident enough to say they'll be above it, but that's good. That's still good enough for that playoff spot in the East, especially since no team has really asserted itself in the early goings. I think you could see like the Cleveland Cavaliers, maybe the Atlanta Hawks passing.
Now, Phil, where do you see them winding up in the playoff picture, and how do you think they'll play without Chandler?
Without Chandler, similarly, I think they'll be slightly above 500, but really, really close to that. In the East, I would say 4 or 5, because I agree Cleveland Cleveland will probably get better. But I don't really see anybody else besides Cleveland really sneaking up and taking that 4 or 5 spot.
Do you think that they can still snag a top 4 spot? I know everyone's had them in 5th since the Nets made that trade. Do you think the Knicks can still get a top 4 spot?
If Chandler wouldn't have gotten hurt, I would have said yes. Without Chandler, I'm really hesitant to say yes on that.
I'm going to still put them at top 4 in the East. I'm going to say they win the Atlantic Division. I'm sticking with it. I don't know why. It's probably pretty naive of me, but I'm just going to stick with it. I don't want to change my spot now.
I think because the Bulls have looked so terrible.
You're right. That's probably a reason why they could still do top 4. I don't even see top 3 being out of the question yet. The Knicks were 12-4 without Chandler last year. I understand he's their defensive linchpin, but if their shots start going in, this is a hard team to defend still. So I guess everything's kind of tied to that center position, though. How many minutes can Kenyon Martin give you? How much of a liability will Andrea Bargnani be? And that's kind of how I see it unfolding. But I think we're at that time again.
Bacon! Bacon! Where's the bacon? I smell bacon! 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 Gotta be bacon! Only one thing smells like bacon!
That's right, it's what burns my bacon, and tonight we're going to find out what's making Phil Montanez sizzle.
Okay, what's making me sizzle today? Number 1, Paul George. Paul George has the opportunity to be a really big star in the NBA, but people are just loving on him way too much, way too early. All I hear all the time is Paul George this, Paul George that, Indiana Pacers, whatever, I don't care. So I'd say, respect for Paul George, but let's let the season play out. Another thing, James Dolan. Why are you hating on the Knicks City Dancers? If the Knicks keep, going down a bad path, people are only going to want to go to the games to see the dancers. So I think that's a little bit upsetting and sort of crazy that he's taking his anger out on the Knicks City Dancers. And then just something I thought about from a comment before, the Bulls. No one is talking about how, poorly the Bulls are playing and how they've gotten off to a bad start and all the concentration's on New York, but, the Bulls haven't looked that good either. So I think because New York plays in one of the biggest markets in the country, we get a lot of, the Knicks get a lot of scrutiny, but there's other teams out there who are supposed to be East powerhouses that are also struggling. And then while I'm at it, last thing, Brooklyn Nets. Everyone lauds that trade, but Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce still look, even though Paul Pierce lost some weight, still looking a little sluggish on the floor. Still got to build that chemistry as well. So we'll definitely see. But I'd say those are the things that definitely are burning my bacon right now.
All right, so apparently we've got a lot of stuff burning Phil's bacon today. We want to know what makes you sizzle. We want to know what you think of the Knicks' chances, especially without Chandler there. Again, we want to thank Phil for coming on the show. This is Adam Fromal and Dan Favale with the Full Court Press. Have a good one, everyone.